Hello everybody, my name is Ian Kirkpatrick. I'm an author, idiot, and loin streamer, and today I'm going to walk you through the list of books that I can remember having read this year, and a tier list for where they would fall in the level of my enjoyment. Now, none of this has anything to do with how good any of them actually are or are not, or what other people think of them. These are just ratings based on my personal enjoyment of any of these books. And we've got some fantastic categories in which things can fit in. But before we get started, number one, if you enjoy what I do on this channel, please remember to like, share, and subscribe for more. Number two, if you would like to be featured on the channel, check out the link down in the description below for Lemoy is the First Way, where I give you guys a prompt. And every first Monday of the month, we go over your guys' submissions for the prompt, your brilliant geniuses, and just pretty much we have a good time. And then the other way is if you are an indie author and you've got a book out or a book coming out, check out the Fresh Meat feature where your book is read here on the channel, and hopefully that helps more readers find your work. I'd link all of wherever you want me to link it down below, and people hopefully hear your chapter, get teased, and then they want some more. So those are your options. Number three, if you would like to read any of my books, you can get them anywhere you enjoy getting books, including the library if you ask. So there's that. Good luck. I hope you have a good time is what I mean. That means it is now time to get into this. So one thing that you're going to notice when I open up my have read this year list is you'll see a variety of books because I have no rhyme or reason. Okay, sometimes there are reasons for the things that I pick up. However, also, I don't just pick books up to enjoy them, so I end up with a lot of different things. Now, one thing to note is that I read 60% indie books this year, at least around 60%. So a majority of the 36, 37 books that I've read this year were indie. I pretty much don't discriminate between indie or trad. I just kind of look for books that I might enjoy, and I personally don't really see much of a difference between the two when I'm shopping. Quality-wise, I generally see what I kind of expect when I'm looking at indie books when it comes to formatting. Sometimes not. A lot of it just, I see manuscripts so often in manuscript form that I don't really even think a whole lot about formatting unless the formatting throws off the way that I'm reading the book itself. So there's that. But I read a lot of indie. I think that there's a lot of interesting stuff and different stuff in indie, and also I've had plenty of failures in trad that it's really just, I'm looking for perspective. Author perspective and storytelling is really what I click to, and at the very least, I'm constantly surprised at the content that I find in indie books, because a lot of trad follows trend chasing. So there's that. We'll get in, you'll see, and I look forward to seeing how many of the books I've read that you've read and what you might be interested in. Once we get over to that side and I start dropping things in, I'll give you a recap of what these stories possibly were, and if I remember why I picked it up, maybe if that even matters. So let's get into the rating system. We've got masterpiece, much enjoyed, F, and trash, set it on fire because hated it wasn't strong enough for some of the books that I've read this year. But F is just like, you know, there's probably still potential in the F area. Is just like, it's fine, but I didn't really care. And then obviously masterpiece and much enjoyed are self-descriptive. So let's get started. The first book that is going to be dropped in was Eve the Awakening by Jenna Moreci. We read this as a loin stream read somewhere in the year. I feel like it was near the beginning of the year, like in spring. I had a blast with this book. It was a little slow at parts, and personally, I felt some of the school stuff could have been chopped down. I thought that the principal could have been made, or the dean, whatever, the dean of students could have been made a woman, and she could have gone full mommy-dommy, and I think Farron should have remained a woman when he transformed from Heather. But I really liked the cast. I loved Percy. I liked that they all had to work together in the end, and Sancho had some hilarious lines, like when they walked into the den of the aliens, and there was all of this ash everywhere, and he freaked out about having dead people in his mouth because he was inhaling human ash. So the characters in that book just had really great chemistry. It was a lot of fun. It was very B sci-fi movie, and I just really enjoyed that book, probably more than I should have. But the Loin stream, I think, made it even more fun for all of us. The next book is Jack of Hearts, which goes in trash, set it on fire. So Jack of Hearts came to my attention because of an article somebody in the Loin family sent me saying that this book was being passed around middle schools, and it was one of the books that parents were protesting. So obviously this year and last year especially, there have been a lot of protests about certain books that are in children's libraries that are being considered inappropriate for children. And one side says it's sexual content and it's super inappropriate, and the other side just says that it's LGBT education. And so I wanted to get to know what one of these books was, and this book was specifically mentioned in an article as being passed around to 12-year-olds in middle school. So I said, okay, I'll pick it up and see what it is, go through the content, so you don't have to, and then make my decision. And boy, did I go through it. And yes, it is an instructional on how to have sex, specifically how to dehumanize people. It is very mean-spirited, disrespectful. From page 1, you've got Jack in the bathroom listening to girls on the other side of the bathroom wall talking about Jack having a foursome, and this is being given to 12-year-olds. I think it's one of the books that actually made me the sickest this year because of the demographic that it's being sold to. And if you go to the page on Goodreads for Jack of Hearts, you see people as far back as 2017 saying that they read this because it's in their school's library. And the author has defended giving it to children, and no, it is not sex education. It is literally somebody telling children how to have sex, and it's disgusting. If you would like to see a full rundown of what is in this book, then there's a review on my channel for it where I walk through all of the major plot points and then read some passages and also tell you my general consensus on all of it. It is also very disrespectful to girls. It hates female characters in the way that it's presented. There are no good female characters. And straight people are the evil ones in it. Apparently, we can't just have a normal book with normal gay protagonists that don't hate women and straight people. At least, that's what this did. So Jack of Hearts was terrible, physically made me ill, specifically because I knew who the target audience was and who it was being sold to and how inappropriate it was. Ugh. Then we have Handbook for Mortals, which I'll put in F. I think it was self-insert fan fiction. It's not the worst thing that I've read, and that's saying a lot considering what I've read this year, but Handbook for Mortals was mostly boring. And then you've got the author slashing herself with a band member. Now, the Handbook for Mortals was another book that we read on the Loin stream, and it came up because this author got big from purchasing her own book to get it on the bestsellers list, which I can't really condemn that because publishers do that all the time, but that is not a discussion for this video. Handbook for Mortals was mostly boring, though when we got to the climax and there was the dagger being being stuck through the heart of Zaid, we changed it to a dildo, which made it so much more funny. But otherwise, that was a really awkward chapter because she was passed out and it changed perspective to have her seeing what was happening to her through the eyes of somebody else. It was weird. There was not a whole lot going on with the circus. The circus show was just a mess of being in there. There were so many characters, but it had potential if it was just thought out and not actually just self-insert fan fiction that I feel like that's taken inspiration from somewhere else also for the insides, but it was boring, but it wasn't the worst thing that I've read. That's why we've got F and then we've got Trash Fire, because there is just like an okay, and then there's like a meh, and then there's like a oof. Actually, yeah, no, Handbook for Mortals wasn't offensive enough to set it on fire. That's also gonna go for Seeker of Time, which, okay, I'm actually gonna say I thought it was more hilarious because the main character having a crush on this guy that turns out to be her twin brother was kind of hilarious. Her hatred for her Spanish teacher, also kind of hilarious. I think if that author leaned more into being campy, it could have been so much more hilarious. I don't think that she was going for campy, but I think that it could have reached like Eve the Awakening campy level if she just leaned into being ridiculous. Seeker of Time was also another book that we read on Loin stream, and I can't entirely remember why it was there, but it was there, what the controversy was. The next book is The Savior's Champion by Jenna Moreci. I read all 3 of Jenna Moreci's books this year, all the way at the beginning of the year. So, but I think The Savior's Champion had a lot of potential. It had a lot of good ideas, but one, it was way too long. It was way too repetitive in the content. And something changed between Eve the Awakening and when The Savior's Champion was written, where the characters were far more caustic for me. Like in Eve the Awakening, you have everybody working together in that main cast, JJ and Sancho and Eve and Jason and Percy and all of them, even if they didn't like each other at first. Like Eve really didn't like JJ for a while, and Eve had to start becoming okay with Sancho at some point. But she still wasn't caustic, and all of the male characters in Eve the Awakening were not terrible people. However, when you get to the Savior's Champion, it is far more mean-spirited. All of the guys are terrible unless it's the gay guy and or the love interest. There are so many more characters that are not developed, and then you have the female characters assaulting the male characters, sexually assaulting the male characters constantly, and it's not addressed in any sort of way. And I'm not saying that you have to like, oh, this is bad, but if you are setting up every male character in your novel to be seen as piggish because they sexually assault or talk sexually towards these female characters that don't want it, and then you literally have your female characters sticking their hands all up in the butt crack of your male love interest and like touching his dingleberries, and somebody else throwing herself at the main character, and then he goes to his love interest and says, hey, this girl assaulted me, and she gets mad at him for her sister forcing herself on him. Like, we have a problem here. Layla never looks good. But I think the Savior's Champion had a lot of potential that wasn't necessarily reached, and I'm not sure why. And then the causticity of it just made it much harder to bear. The next book is the Southern Book Club. None of these are in the order in which I read them. They're just in the order in which they're at the bottom of my screen. But recently this month, I read the Southern, I think it was this month, might have been last month. I read Southern Book Club's Guide to Slaying Vampires by Grady Hendrix. That goes to Set It on Fire, because what a freaking mess. What a disgrace of a freaking mess that was between Patty. I have a long book review on this channel for it if you're interested, but the most egregious thing is the disdain that Grady has for all of the characters in the novel. The fact that he doesn't establish any of the characters, doesn't establish any of the lore for the vampires, doesn't seem to care about the story at all. And then he dares to make Patty commit suicide, blame her husband for committing suicide. The husband then gives her the ultimatum of, hey, can you be my wife and the mother to your children, or are you going to continue with your obsession with going after our neighbor? And then it time skips through all of the fallout that was created by her committing suicide. And then in the end of the book, she sleeps with another man, blames her husband for her marriage falling apart when she's the one that was cheating and all he ever did was take care of her. And then she gets the kids. She tried to commit suicide. We skipped through all of this stuff. Oh my gosh. I'm gonna get into it again if I have to talk about this stupid book. Set It on Fire. What a lazy piece of trash book. It is not the only one that did this to me this year. Manhunt is the next book, but that goes into trash. Set It on Fire. That was a difficult book to go through. That came up because of controversy surrounding how it is a gender apocalypse book, and it was being pitted against the men, which I'll get to down here later, as both books removed men or had consequences to men, and the world was basically then run by women. And with the Manhunt, it featured 2 trans women as the main characters, and then a trans man as the secondary main character, because he traveled around with the main group. And it was sexually obsessed. It felt like it was fetish stuff for real. And maybe that's part of the splatterpunk thing, is being overly sexual. The splatterpunk and the gender apocalypse thing, maybe it's meant to be overly sexual, but it felt very fetishy to me. And it also felt very caustic and mean. And the writing style was very jarring. It was not very well planned out for the way that the plot moved. And I just didn't really like it at all. It was very mean. Very mean-spirited book. Speaking of mean-spirited books, we have The Savior's Sister by Jenna Moreci, which that one goes into trash. Set It on Fire, because why did we need this book? It is basically a repeat of The Savior's Champion, but from Layla's perspective. And if you gave Layla the benefit of the doubt in The Savior's Champion, well, benefit of the doubt no more. She ruins her own character in this book by making her an OP girl boss, psychopathic bitch that just takes advantage of everybody, and everybody bows down, makes their entire lives about her, and sure, she is the savior, and you could have done something very interesting with this entire society that builds their entire lives around pleasing this woman, especially if she's a tyrant, but you're supposed to look at Layla as if she's better than her father Brontes, but she's actually worse than Brontes because she has all of the power, and she kills more people in this book than Brontes does. Like, sure, Brontes is like, I'm fine with killing the entire kingdom so that I can have power, but Layla is literally doing that, and so there are so many plot holes introduced through the Savior Sister with this perspective that it's just, how is it longer than the Savior's Champion when it literally repeats scenes? I think that if Jenna Moreci really wanted to have both books, or both perspectives, then the Savior's Champion could have been done with swapping perspectives to see both sides of what's going on. But part of me feels like that she didn't want to do that because she wanted to keep the reveal of Layla being the real savior as a secret. But I don't think anybody was fooled that Layla was the savior. So I don't really know. But the Savior Sister was insufferable. Oh my gosh. So where the Savior's Champion had a potential Savior Sister, no. The next book is The Cyborg Tinkerer by Meg Latour, and that was the first book that we read on the Loin Stream this year. It was also an anniversary read because it was the very first book that we read on the Loin Stream last January when the Loin Stream initially began. Actually, it is the whole origin story of the Loin Stream, because I had been reading the book and posting blurbs and thoughts as I went, and I asked people if they wanted to do a live read together, and they said yes, and so we did a live read, and the Loin Stream came from just the number of times that the book was thirsty, and that is the origin of the Loin Stream. So, of course, we read it on the first anniversary of the Loin Stream. We will not be reading it again in January. I think we're reading Night of the Mannequins in January at this point. So with Meg Latour's book, I feel like I'm getting like emotions. It's like a nostalgia read now because of having read it twice with the Loin Streamers, but it was not a good book. But it was, you could at least tell that Meg had fun writing it and she liked what she was writing, which cannot be said about like Grady Hendrix's book. But I think I was in pain for that book, so I'm dropping it, and I'm sorry. I'm sorry, Meg. Actually, okay, I'm moving it to F, because there was potential, and it was not full of hate. And I feel like there's a nice difference for me when a book is not caustically or maliciously written, even if it's so painful to go through. So just F's. F's in the chat for that book. I'm sorry that you had to go through what you went through with that too, Meg. It's unfortunate. So another book that we read for the Loin Stream was Memories in the City. It was an alternative history style story. A lot of people likened it to Thief and Dishonored. I only played the first Dishonored, and it's been a while since I played it. And it was pretty enjoyable. I mean, for me, it didn't stand out as anything like exceptionally clicked with what I enjoy, but it wasn't bad. It was a time. Not F's in the chat. And I think it'll feed you if that style of book with kind of a light, hard-boil kind of action-adventure-y thing is what you're looking for. He did an interesting job with the world building in that book. Then we've got The Eye of the Universe by Matthew Waterhouse, and that was also a Loin Stream read. This is about a guy who was stranded in a space station all by himself, and then he kind of dresses up a dead body, Ziggy, and uses that as companionship as he tries to find other survivors on the ship, and eventually tries to find a way to radio out so that he can be saved from probably certain death. And it has some very interesting visuals, a very interesting path, and the use of having a secondary character that is dead and this character going through all of this stuff, very interesting. Actually, this is a book that I would like to see a visual representation of, because I think especially the different rooms and the different floors, decks that are set up for entertainment, and especially the one that has the star deck, would be super beautiful visually. The same with the medical bay. The one thing that really kind of for me on that book was the ending. I think that it could have had a more satisfying ending, and it was the ending chapters that made my opinion of it drop a little bit, but it was still very much an enjoyable experience. The next book is Luck by Chris Koppel. Thank you for making your name so large so I can read it on this. That was basically an I Hate Donald Trump movie script where it started with the birth of this child, going up through all of his years until he was a businessman who then got vomited on by whoever it was that he was with. I don't remember at this point. I have a book review of it on this channel, but it was I Hate Donald Trump fan fiction is what it was, and it was somebody who was also writing for a movie script, so it was not written like prose, which made it even harder and worse to go through. So much telling. I don't read books for the politics. What a letdown. The cover is cool, and the idea behind it was cool, which is having this level of charisma that is so huge, it's basically magical, where you can tell people what to do when they go and do it. That would have been neat, but that book was not neat. A Long Dark Shadow by Alan Walker was a nonfiction book about his study with pedophiles, where he was interviewing pedophiles to get their perspective on pedophilia, and he justified pedophilia and tried to call it a sexuality a bunch of times, and then tried to make you feel bad for pedophiles. And while I appreciate the insight, specifically to the perspective of how these people think, so that you can know how they think in their own heads, whether you don't have to agree with it, but now you know what arguments they're making and what they're telling themselves and how they move things around. Like in this book, they straight up say, some of them straight up say that they get offended when people are angry that a pedophile was arrested, like somebody who actually harmed a child. So they will try to say, hey, we're different than child molesters, but then they will identify with child molesters as they're being arrested. Or they talk about how they commandeer popular language. Like they say they like to use queer because then they can meld into the LGBT community and nobody knows what they are and that they are pedophiles. But they still feel like they're being honest about their identity. Or some of them say they are pro-choice, and when they say pro-choice, they mean they are pro-choice for the children to choose whether to be in a relationship with an adult or not. And they use those sleight of tongue so they can tell you what they believe, but they have a different meaning to it. So reading books like that is really good to get into the heads of those people, but it is also dastardly because it's trying to convince you of the pedophiles and child molesters, justifications, or that they are victims, and they are not victims. There are also people in there that say that they think child pornography is totally ethical, and people in there who will say that they think it is totally legit for adults to date children, and some of them in that book say they are attracted to children under 2. So, disgusting. Don't go in there thinking that you're going to be convinced or to let yourself be convinced, but go in there as a study for a more honest manner of how they try to manipulate your opinions with the way they present their ideas. Garbage, trash fire, because this person thinks that they are justified. It is So the next book is Heather by G.C. McKay, and he is a YouTuber here. I just read that because I ran into him at some point. I can't remember why. One of his videos came up, or he came up somewhere, and so then I went to check out his book, and Heather has has some controversy around it, because it is a story of, you guessed it, a pedophile. Look, I had the Jenna Moreci spring, and then the pedophile summer is literally, I don't know why this was my year, but it was my year. And so Heather was McKay's version of Lolita. I didn't like it. It tries a lot to be similar to Lolita, and it even starts with a line like saying the character is a pedophile is the very first line, but it spends too much time, one, trying to justify the pedophile, which characters can do whatever they want. Characters are free to be whoever they gotta be, and a bad guy character or a character who is immoral is always going to generally try and justify their immoral actions, which is fine. But what is more jarring to me than a character who justifies their stuff, which that is totally fine. Again, I don't care that your character is a pedophile and that your character justifies his pedophilia, but what becomes more interesting is when you look at book reviews or you look at the author talking about it, and the author or the book reviewers are justifying that this guy is right about these things. That is where the conversation gets sketchy. Because I can recognize when a character is right about something, but I can also say you're still wrong in this other thing. And the main character of that book blaming like a 14-year-old girl and saying that she has more autonomy than he does is not correct. So that gets to go in Trash Fire. I don't think it had enough nuance, and I think more than the book itself. But the discussions of the book that gave more clarity to what the author was trying to do made it worse. Yeah. So then we've got The Wasp Factory, which was a book that I read with Katie from Year of the Author, and then Laura from Trinity Trope Trilogy for our book club that we had this year. And it was okay. It had potential, but I think that it needed to be worked out more, and I think the story ended before it should have. We should have gotten the interaction between the main character and his brother once they were united so that they could have a closing moment of some kind, and we really got blue-balled with that book. Yeah. Pretty Dead Queens by Alexa Dunn I read earlier this year. I think that was at the end of summer. So boring. Trash Fire, I don't know. It was painful, but I think that's just, I don't like the types of main characters that Alexa Dunn writes. And then they're like all bitchy. And they're all self-justified. And, oh, that one had 2 villain monologues. That's right. I have a video review of that if you want to see all the nitty-gritty with that. But it had 2 villain monologues. It had 2... The main character didn't do anything to get to the information at the end. The main character moved in and everybody in the small town just suddenly trusted her with literally everything. None of the police protocols made any sense. One of the endings included the cops just running into the room and the main character just pointing at the suspect and saying, "He did it, he told me, he lied to me, and he did it." And they arrest him with no evidence. Like, he could literally say the same thing to her, and this death happened after she moved in, and her grandmother is a mystery novelist. So it could easily have been that there is enough trust in this community that the bad guy could have just said, actually, she did it, and now she's trying to blame me because I caught on to her. But we don't get really any resolution. She just points her finger and says, that person is guilty. He gets taken off, and then that's where that ends, and then we get the second villain monologue, and it's terrible. It's terrible. So, A New Calling. I think it has a new name now, but when I read it earlier this year, it was called A New Calling, and that is about a young woman who goes to move to live with her mother in London after her relationship with her father's assistant kind of falls apart. There was an age gap. There was some inappropriate relationships going on, and I actually thought that this book did a really good job of what a relationship between an older man and an underage girl looked like and the damage that it caused to a young girl. I really liked the perspective of the introduction of kind of the supernatural things that it was doing, but it was also sold to me like there would be more supernatural stuff in it, and I was constantly waiting for supernatural stuff to happen, and then it didn't. I think the character stuff between the main character and her older boyfriend who chases her to London was more than enough to like do this book and follow through on this book, and it is very the relationship is very complex and well done with that. It was just, there were all of these other sub-stories that didn't really make sense to me. And then she gets powers in the end, and I didn't understand how the powers had anything to do with the interpersonal drama that was going on. So it felt like 2 or 3 different stories all squished into one, and I didn't really understand that much. So it had potential, and I think that if it was worked out more what it was trying to do and what the main story was, then it could have been a lot stronger, because the characters and the character arcs and the relationships were already super strong. The next book is Dracula's Guest, which I'm going to put into Much Enjoyed. This was by Dracula's Guest has super delightful characters. I've read the first draft of the second book. I really, really like the way that she does characters. I think the thing that dropped this down for me from Masterpiece is that it reads like it's written like a television script or a movie script, not like prose, and I can tell. So the prose could have been cleaned up. It would also work really well for a radio script or a radio reading, because it initially came from a television script, but written as a novel, it loses something because it gets bogged down by directing what should have been director stuff for television, and it never got developed into prose for a book. It's the same issue that Luck had, except different, because the characters in Dracula's Guest were better, and Dracula's Guest actually has movement, whereas everything in Chris Koppel's book was summary to get through every scene, to, make his Donald Trump character grow up, and then so he could humiliate him, and it's just, oh my gosh, that book is a mess. But Dracula's Guest, very enjoyable. I love the characters of it so much. Malcolm, obviously, Team Malcolm for the win in general. Just, that man needs love, but he also hits like one of my favorite character archetypes, so I love that man. The Pawn and the Puppet I feel like I have to put that in F because, like, it's not trash fire. It is a mess and it is over the top and it is ridiculous. But again, this is one of those books that you can tell the author really liked what she was writing and it was a passion project for her and it is something that she cares about. And I might not like it and it might be totally ridiculous. Actually, I might have struggled and hated it, but at least she didn't hate it or her subject matters when she was writing it. The Pawn and the Puppet was another book that I read with Katie and Laura for our book group. So there's that. The next book is also another one that we read for the book group, which is Light Lark by Alex Astor. I will pretend that I can promise I'm going to finally post my book review of that next year in January. We'll see if that happens. I will try. I will sincerely try. I open up the file for all of my notes and I see that it is 45 pages long and then I just get overwhelmed and I close it. So we'll see if I can get you guys my formal thoughts since the live stream for that is gone. But I know. Oh, Light Lark goes and I hate trash fire. Like, obviously Astor liked what she was doing, but the girl bossing, Isla's girl bossing made me so angry. Also, the plot's nonsensical, but Isla's everything made me so angry reading this stupid book. The only bit of grace that it gets is Vanya and her love for Grimm. That's all that it gets. Lurid Curse is the fifth book in the His Name Was Augustin series. It gets to go in dumpster trash fire. I was reading that because I had already subscribed to reading all of 6 books in the His Name Was Augustin series. That is the 5th one that came out earlier this year. I think it was in spring, and then the 6th book came out in the summer. That one, Swanee got so many people killed that had nothing to do with her. Poor Joel. Swanee never suffers, but everybody around her suffers. Which, since it's right there, we're going to go ahead and drop Luminous Fortune, which is the 6th book, also in the dumpster fire. I'm trying to remember exactly what was in Lurid Curse, because it's kind of a fever dream. Some of the things, it's like so boring, and then something happens and you're like, what the frick am I reading? Why is it doing this to me? If you want to see my series roundup for the His Name Was Augustin series, I've got that on this channel, and I still highly recommend that you go and check out any of the books that I like or don't like, and then come back and have a discussion, because I love talking about the ideas in any of these books. The next one is Dark Harvest, which freaking dumpster fire. I am sorry, Will Jordan, your book is a dumpster fire. Review coming in January, and get ready for some hot words, because I cannot believe that you would, one, give me a generic Action Man zombie book, which, whatever, that's not offensive on its own. It could have just been an F or an E. But instead, you give me a book that is written like a movie script, because you obviously watch movies and television. You also give me these people that kill everybody that comes in contact with them, and they never reflect on it. Then you trauma dump on me. Then you also reference a bunch of movie lines and then think that it's clever. And then you also, like, just randomly drop stuff in, like, oh, my wife died in 9/11, so I'm a bad guy now. Are you serious? And then you take us to the climactic moment. Let's not forget the 10% prologue. 2 prologues. We didn't need 2 prologues. Where the one with the girl didn't even make sense. Like, you could have done the Soviets or the random little girl in the woods that there was this mystical stone that caused all of these microorganisms. The 2 didn't work together, but we got 2 prologues for 2 totally different stories smushed together, not either of them developed. And then we're at the end of the story, and the main character, Action Man, is shot and passes out, and Lori Dalton, the Who person who had to hike up this mountain in the middle of a storm because we were told that it's storming and the weather was getting bad, so they ducked into this cave, also because that's the cave they were looking for. She has to find a way to get back down the hill to the chopper all by herself without a guide, when they used a guide to get here, and it took them, like, what, an hour or 2 to get there? And so the main character blacks out, we're in his perspective, and then we're time skipped to the epilogue, and everything is fine. Like, he literally time skipped over the climax. You cannot make me read 12 hours of a book and then skip over the climax. Lazy. So trash fire. Don't waste my time. Don't waste my freaking time. Rage is, I think, the first book that we read for the Problematic Book Club. It was my pick. Thank you. And I actually really enjoyed it. It was by Stephen King. It is a canceled book. He stopped printing it because it's considered offensive or something. I think it's offensive that he stopped printing it because it holds a very valuable perspective in it for somebody who is hopeless and takes out their anger on other people and convinces others to be just as hopeless and just how destructive that can be inside of a closed environment. We have Whoever Fights Monsters by Robert Ressler. It is a nonfiction about the creation of the behavioral science unit in the FBI and serial killer profiling. He worked on a lot of cases and actually met a bunch of serial killers in the 1980s, like John Wayne Gacy, Ed Kemper. I think he talked about working with Ted Bundy, and then there were other things, and he just talked about profiling and how profiling worked and what he did with that kind of stuff. Very enjoyable book. Do get ready for a bit of ego, but you're gonna have ego when you're talking about FBI agents. I mean, then there was Lolita, which it was fine. It wasn't like my favorite, but it was well written and it was fine. And that was also a book that was read for the Problematic Book Club with Katie and Laura. I almost said Lori. Lori Dalton has still got me. Got Model Land. No, that goes down one. We got Model Land by Tyra Banks, which was another read for the Loin Stream, and it was so much fun. The Eldritch God Dark Souls level of monstrosities that were in the area surrounding Model Land were so good. I need a Model Land movie like 2 years ago. Somebody make it happen. We've got the Barbie movie. We can have a Model Land movie. Please make it happen. Oh my gosh. So then we got Killer Fiction, which I'm gonna drop in a masterpiece, sort of, because it's an interesting perspective. It's short stories written by a killer that was here in Florida. And then he corresponded with a chick that he went to high school with, gave her the stories, she published it. There's also some correspondences she had with him. And so it's very interesting to get into the psychosexual perspective of this person and see what he thinks and how he feels and how he created the world. Because what I get from books a lot is a general perspective of how an author or a person thinks, how they see the world, what they find important, because that's how we write. We write about our obsessions, we write about the worlds that we see, and we repackage them to try to show them to other people, however that means. It's really hard to describe, but you know what you're looking for, you know what you're looking at when you're looking at it. If you know how to look for it. Not everything in a book is, this is what the author believes, but you get an idea of how an author sees the world based on certain things in the book. That's the best that I can say. And so that's a really interesting perspective, specifically from a serial killer and a serial killer writing fiction. Some of it may be less fictional than others. There's no way to know, but he claims that it is all fictitious. It is, if you're looking for examples of also written gore, he is very good at the written gore, as you might expect, from somebody who was a sexual murderer. Then you've got Stiff by Mary Roach, which I read recently. It is the life and times of cadavers. It is 10 to 11 chapters or essays about what we do in modern society or have done in society with people once they die and the different ways the bodies have been used over time. It was a very interesting read. I highly recommend it if you're interested in seeing how bodies are used or cadavers have been used over time. There's a lot of really interesting information and perspective in there, and also what science and societies are willing to do with the dead. It's a lot. It's a lot. Then we've got All I Want for Christmas is a Fingerling. I was going to do a whole video on this book. It is about... It's not what I normally read, but I couldn't stand it. I'm sorry. You just have to suffer with not getting a full breakdown of this book. But All I Want for Christmas is a Fingerling is a book that, it's a romance shifter book that features a potato shifter named Frenchie and a wolf shifter, and they fall in love, and the whole second half of the book is Frenchie being pregnant and having to pee. It feels like the author had unresolved pregnancy pee issues because of how often that specifically came up, and I wanted more story, especially when the potato's mating ritual is like you cut the potato and then you eat the potato. As long as you leave 1/3 of the potato, they will regenerate. Also, the punishment for betraying the potato tribe is also being roasted and eaten by the other potatoes. So, like, I was into it for the potato shifter lore, but instead it's almost all sexual tension, all sexual romance, a lot of bodily fluids. And then half of the book is pregnancy. And so I'm just like, So disappointed that that's what it was. Then we've got The Men, which was another gender apocalypse. I read it at the same time as I read Manhunt because the two books were being compared, specifically because one was written by a trans woman, that is Manhunt, and then The Men was written by a biological woman, and it got in trouble because it's titled The Men, and when the gender apocalypse came into the story, the character, the mystical thing took away all of the XY chromosomes, including trans women, and so people were calling that transphobic and trying to cancel this author, and specifically the author of Manhunt was also on the page for The Men and was giving it low ratings. It felt more like a battle between authors working in the same genre or subgenre, niche genre than anything, and it felt kind of skivvy to me that that was what was going on, but whatever. I didn't enjoy it because it was, you know what I really don't like with these books that are controversial is that you don't actually get honest reviews that talk about the issues of the book, and instead it's all like, I support this, or this author is terrible. This book is terrible because you're presented with this mystical, all of the men disappear one day. And you get to the end of it, and it turns out that everything was just a dream. And so she wakes up after falling in love with her college, with this cop-killing communist from college, decides that she's going to divorce her husband and ditch her child. Wow, are we back? At least I guess Patty didn't go, I'm gonna divorce you and ditch my children, but the children would have been better off in the Southern Book Club if the mom wasn't, if Patty didn't. Anyway. The Men was terrible. Do not... And the I woke from a dream and this entire book was a dream and useless is such a bad ending. You just wasted my entire life for having read that stupid book and saying, haha, just kidding. And then you end it with, and I hate men, including my son who's like 4 years old. Screw you, that was such a terrible book. And nobody talks about it because they're too busy with the politics. That's why I hate political reviews. The next one is Flames of Lethe, which I actually read because the author of the His Name Was Ogden series highly recommended Flames of Lethe as a book that she really liked, especially for redemption arcs, especially for redemption arcs of rapists. So for me to try to get a better idea on how the author of His Name Was Ogden was trying to create the way that she sees her story and her main character, I read that book to see what she considered a good recommendation. About a girl that wakes up in a desert with this other guy, and they're both naked and they're traveling forever. It turns out that they're in hell, and that turns into them eventually stumbling upon like this hidden city thing in the middle of the desert where the girl gets sent off to sex school and the guy gets sent off to go and live in society, and the girls have a certain amount of time where they're trained in order to behave because hell apparently services men, while the women just have to be sex slaves. And if you do really well in the sex school, then you may end up with only 1 or 2 partners as a top tier, you know, S or A level sex slave. And if you do really poorly in sex school, then you're basically a public commodity that anybody can use. And eventually this guy named Adam purchases her at the end of the sex school, and the guy that she was with is jealous. And turns out that what all of this is it was an office romance where the main character was dating the guy that purchased her. They were at the office. She was an IT worker. And then there was like was it a Christmas party? There was a party at work, and the other guy, I'm trying to remember what his name is. I don't remember what Not Adam's name was. But the loser guy, because that's what he is. He was a rapist. Okay, so the rapist got mad because he had a crush on the main character, and the main character didn't notice, and he felt like a loser. And so then at the holiday party, he raped the main character on the same night that Adam was going to propose to the main character. And so then when Adam came in to propose, she told him no, because obviously she was raped. She didn't tell him that she was raped, but he was heartbroken that she told him no. So then he got drunk and drove home and then died in a drunk driving accident. And then she noticed that he wasn't at work. And then one day she finally went into Adam's office, saw that he was gone, heard that he died because of drunk driving on that night of the party. So she blamed the rapist guy. And then so she stabbed the rapist guy, then killed herself. And that's how they ended up in hell. And that's the story. And then we learn all of this in the end, by the way, with a bunch of flashbacks right before she forgives him for raping her. And then they go back in time. Basically, everything was just a dream right up to the point where the dude was about to rape her so that they could change history. So again, another Awake from a Dream. Also, garbage. Sorry, not sorry. The next one is The Wild by K. Webster. Was it K.W. Webster? This is a father-daughter taboo romance that I read because of Katie. To see what is in it, I will be doing a video on it next year. Trash fire. Just absolute trash fire. Not specifically because it is incest, but also because it is incest. It is absolute trash fire, though. Don't get me started on that one. The next one is All Hail the Carrion King by Thomas Godfrey. I'm going to put that in F because it had a lot of potential, but I felt like it leaned too much into political for me to actually be able to enjoy it, and it was very heavy-handed in the political messaging. And the same can be said for Dead Skin Mask, which was also by Godfrey. Both of those were indie books. The author had messaged me when the Dead Skin Mask was coming out, and so I went and got the book because it sounded interesting from what I'd heard about it, read it, and then I read All Hail the Carrion King to kind of get an idea of how this author writes, how much is the character, how much is the author's thoughts maybe on the world. If you're interested in more details on both of those books, I did a review of it last week here on the channel, so you can see both of them and how I compared them and what my main gripes were for them. But I think that there's a lot of potential, and that author is actually very good at descriptions and creating the visual representations of the world that the characters are in, but I think those books leaned way too much on political messaging for me to be able to enjoy them. And the last book on my list that I've read this year was My Best Friend's Exorcism by Grady Hendrix. I should say I'm only about halfway through this book so far, but it's not as bad as the Southern Book Club's Guide to Vampire Slaying, mostly because there are more scenes in My Best Friend's Exorcism that are played out and are written, and it feels like Grady actually cared more about writing this book than he did about the subjects in the Southern Book Club. I still have half of the book to go, and it will be done by the end of this year, I promise. But I'm buddy reading that with Montana, and I also buddy read the Southern Book Club with Montana. Hopefully, we will do some more book reads in the near future, and do some book discussions because I really like talking to her about books. So those are all of the books that I read this year. As you can see, there's quite a variety here on what lands where. And you can probably question my taste from how things have landed. Sometimes I'm like, some of these were not as bad as others as I look at the list, but it's fine. I'm actually okay with how this mostly looks, I think. With that said, I do want to mention a couple of books that I do plan on reading in the coming year. One of them is The Shards by Bret Easton Ellis. I've had that on my desktop for a couple of months now as an ARC, so I'm going to read that before March. Hopefully in January, we'll see. I'm also going to be reading Body and Blood by Michael Gallagher. I'm going to be reading both of Igao Chan's books. Igao is a friend of the channel, so we're going to see how that goes. He is so funny with Lemoy. He is so funny in general. Check out his stuff for real. I'm going to be reading Tokyo Vice, which is a nonfiction about an American journalist kind of following the beats of the Yakuza in the 1990s. I've had that for a couple of months, but I just haven't gotten to read it yet. So again, hopefully I get to that. I'm going to read the two spooky haunted books about haunted Louisville, Kentucky. I got both of those in preparation to write my books, Not Dead and Still Not Dead, which are both set in Louisville, Kentucky, and about a funeral parlor guy who, unfortunately, somehow when he starts building relationships with people, they die by some freak accident. Like, even the OBGYN who delivered him as an infant had spent too much time with him, so as he was being birthed, that man died, unfortunately. I'm also going to read No Longer Human by Junji Ito and Tower of Dogs by H.H. Miller. So those are a couple of books that I know that I want to read in the coming year. That's not all that I'm going to read, obviously, but those are what I'm going to read. I think I'm also going to try to read Survive the Night, because I've heard some infamous things. I might see if Monty will read that with me, because I saw in the comments of that book that it's a great buddy read, because there's stuff to talk about with it, and those make it the best buddy reads. So a lot of the books on my list are actually things that I'd really like other people to read so that I can discuss them specifically. So don't take my enjoyment of the books as whether you should read them or not. You should read all of them if any of them interest you in any sort of way, whether it's because they sound like a dumpster fire, because they sound interesting, because you want to see the perspective of them. Maybe you'll like them way more than I did, but I love talking about books specifically, the ideas in them, and the different ways in which we interact with them. So that's everything that I've got going on right now. Thank you so much for watching this video. Let me know what books you're looking forward to reading in 2023. Are any of them mine? I gotta ask that. You know, I gotta ask at least once, right? The last time of the year. With that said, thank you so much for watching. Join us tomorrow night for the special edition Cringe stream. Cringe Loin stream, where we are reading Cringe submitted by you guys. It's gonna be a blast. Thank you so much for watching. If I haven't said that already, I'm sorry if I've already said that. I appreciate you. I appreciate you a lot, okay? And you've stuck with me. You've seen what my reading habits look like. It's... I know, I'm sketch. I admit, I am sketchy as frick. But thank you. Have a great weekend. Have a great New Year's. And don't die. See you either tomorrow or in the new year.
Was that Wayland Cross in the trunk? Do you know, or is that something that's still being figured out?
The person in the trunk was not Wayland Cross.
Is he in trouble?
We don't know who did it, but as the owner of the car, the longer he's missing, the worse it looks for him.
Cross isn't a killer. For the last couple of years, the average number of murders in Baltimore has been over 300, and it's been going up. Mind you, that's only whatever the badges count as official murder, and believe me, there are people that don't count when they die. Wayland? If you're down here, tell me. I'm not talking to the badges, I've been looking for you. They found a body in your trunk. Why? Did you do that? To the left. Plain black letters read along the wall. You walked in the corridor. Once that ends, you chose the dark is on the right. My vision goes blurry, flickers black and black and black for longer intervals until I can't see anything at all. I'm not screaming anymore, but my voice echoes back to me. Where the hell am I? You're dead, Josephine. Even smart people do stupid shit sometimes, right?